Tennessee football is one step closer to a selection to the Gator Bowl. Who will the Vols play? To be determined. Welcome into the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside the Knoxville News Sentinel's Adam Sparks and John Adams. Tennessee, as expected, took care of its business against Vanderbilt. Big day for Joe Milton on senior day. And the Vols are 8-4. Bowl game selections, of course, not decided yet. That'll happen after the conference championship games. Bowl assignments will come out on Sunday, but almost all signs point to the Gator Bowl, which our resident expert Adam Sparks has been telling us for weeks is a likely destination. And now it's starting to come into focus as to who Tennessee might face if they are indeed headed to Jacksonville. So first, Adam, bring us up to speed, and then we will break down whether we think these would be good, bad, or otherwise potential assignments for Tennessee.
Yeah, I was hoping for Tampa, by the way, what used to be called the Outback Bowl, but now I hope it remains the Gator Bowl because I have a flight. The wife and I booked flights the day after the Missouri game to go to the Gator Bowl. So
it's a bold move.
I hope that holds up. It's like a 80% chance. I think it's the Gator Bowl for Tennessee not to go to the Gator Bowl. Some weird things would have to happen, which would include like Alabama would have to beat Georgia in the SEC title game. They'd probably both need to get in the playoff. Ole Miss and Missouri would both need to get a New Year's Six. So if those things happen, then Tennessee could bump up to Tampa. But if it goes as chalk, so to speak, Tennessee should go to the Gator Bowl. They have an 8-4 record. There's no other 8-4s in the SEC, so that's why there's not as much mystery this year as there normally is. North Carolina and NC State, those are the two that are projected, and it's about 50-50 at this point if you look at the national projections of which team Tennessee could play. I mean, it's pretty clear cut of what you have there. North Carolina is a lot of offense and not very good defense. They're 8-4. They have Drake May at quarterback, who will be probably a top 5 pick in the draft this year. Now I guess it's very different if Drake May plays in that game as opposed to if he opts out. I would think he would opt out, but I think he's pretty true blue Carolina. So he may play it. I don't know. I don't know why he would play the Gator Bowl. I'm sure he would be advised not to do that. But with Drake May, they put up a lot of points. They're really good on offense. They have a 1,400-yard rusher, good deep rotation at wide receiver. I don't even know who Drake May's backup is. But offense is what you're going to get in North Carolina. NC State is the better team. They're 9-3. They also beat North Carolina 39-20 the other night. They're 6-2 in the ACC. They're a better team. They're more centered on defense. Not very good offense, pretty good defense. So if you want to see Tennessee play against offense, you're going to get then North Carolina's your pick. If you want to see Tennessee play like a slow, controlled offense and a good, strong defense, that's going to be NC State. And on paper, NC State is the better of the two. Now, that being said, there's some weird inconsistencies in these two teams. So, like North Carolina lost their last two. They started fast in the year, and they are limping to the finish line. And I mentioned Drake May opt out. So maybe that's the weaker of the two. And I think in terms of name recognition, Tennessee fans would rather play in North Carolina than NC State. There's a little more prestige to that, I guess. And I think they're the worst of the two teams. But, early in the year, they beat South Carolina. They beat Miami. North Carolina lost to Virginia. And if you remember, Tennessee blew out Virginia in the opener. So North Carolina can be pretty good. They can also be terrible at times. NC State was sluggish early in the year, beat UConn by 10. Tennessee blew out UConn. I can't imagine how NC State only beat UConn by 10, but they did. They only beat Virginia by a field goal. So again, how does that happen? The ACC, I think, is just sort of middle of the pack teams. That's what you get. But NC State's been hot late in the year. They've won 5 straight. They beat Clemson. They beat Miami. They just beat North Carolina. So the hotter team is NC State. So I guess if you're looking for your best chance to win and probably the most more name recognition, you would want to play. You would want to play North Carolina, but it's NC State, I guess, is the better of the two teams. It may be a coin flip at this point.
I wonder if the fact that NC State and Tennessee are playing next year would figure into the selection at all. Would you rather not play a team you're going to play again? I don't know. I don't know if the date is set on that game. Is that supposed to be the first game, Adam, or is that
no, they'll play it's the Dukes Mayo Classic. It's week 2 in September is when they would play. And I've heard that the Gator Bowl leans a little more towards North Carolina. They would want North Carolina. So I think North Carolina maybe hasn't played there in a while. I would have to check on that. But by the way, the other option for these two teams, or one of the other options, is the Pop-Tart Bowl for NC State and North Carolina. And it came out today as we record this that the Pop-Tart Bowl is going to have an edible mascot this year. It's in Orlando. I'd much rather go there. They're going to have a huge Pop-Tart mascot, and the winning team gets to go over and take bites out of the mascot at the end. So
that's how we know the pandemic's over. We're now all nibbling off the same giant Pop-Tart.
That's exactly what I said. That's the better version. What Dukes Mayo is like the worst version of that, and Pop-Tart is the best version of that. If it's strawberry, if it's like one of these cinnamons or something, I wouldn't touch that.
John, you have a different perspective on the Gator Bowl because you got some miles under your tires, as I know. And at one time, I mean, the Gator Bowl wasn't the Tournament of Roses, right? But, I mean, the Gator Bowl was something resembling a big deal. It's been around for a long time. I don't know that it registers the same way it used to, but help us out with some perspective here, John. This was once a pretty big game, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, and also I was a columnist in Jacksonville for a couple of years, so and now I've been to 2 Gator Bowls with Tennessee. Yeah, if you go back and when there weren't so many bowls before the grand proliferation of bowl games, you had Rose Bowl, Cotton, Sugar, and Orange were the big 4. And then the 5th bowl was the Gator Bowl. It was just a notch below, and you would have some really good matchups. There was one of the best, I can still remember this game, was Auburn versus Ole Miss, Archie Manning versus Pat Sullivan. And it was a great game. 2 SEC teams. Jacksonville's really SEC country. So yeah, I think it's, and I don't think that means much now, though. Just because it's been around a long time, I don't think people look at that. I think they would rather go, as Adam said, to Orlando or maybe even Tampa than Jacksonville. I like Jacksonville. Like I said, I lived there for 2 years, and they've got some good beaches. Not as well known of beaches, but you've been to a few of those, Blake, so you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Yeah.
I don't mind trips to Jacksonville. It kind of depends what you like. Do you like Disney? Do you like the beach? Tampa would probably be a little warmer. Yeah, I think you could make a case for Jacksonville. It doesn't rank as high on Adam's list, but
I mean, it's better than the Liberty Bowl. I'll say that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The matchup to me is clearly this is Tennessee should be rooting for North Carolina. But I don't know why the Gator Bowl would want North Carolina, because I would be really afraid of the quarterback leaving and opting out of the game. I mean, that just kills the game. I think NC State, as it proved last Saturday, is a better team. NC State has one of the best defensive players in the country. Peyton Wilson, I watched him in a few games. He just dominates games. He's big and fast in the middle of that defense. So to me, that would be a better game from a closeness standpoint. But for Tennessee, if it wants to win a game, pick up a win, get number 9, match Butch Jones's 2 best seasons, then go for North Carolina.
And they've had some at NC State. They've had some things that have kind of come together late in the year. I mentioned they've won 5 in a row. They had a quarterback change in the middle of the year, and one guy there, and then he opted out of the rest of the season so he could redshirt. And Brennan Armstrong has been their starter for the last, 4 or 5 games. Brennan Armstrong was the all-time career passer at Virginia, went into the portal, ended up at NC State. He started the last few games. They've been winning. So they're on a hot streak. Now, that being said, I don't know, and I know we'll get to Tennessee, what roster Tennessee's going to have for the bowl, but you don't know what roster NC State's going to have for the bowl because, I mean, just in the last couple of days, Dave Doran, the NC State coach, has pleaded with NC State fans to give money to the collective, to the Wolfpack collective there, because they're terrified they're going to lose their best players in the portal. That one of their best players, Casey Conception, is a wide receiver. He's a receiver. He's also a runner, a real big playmaker. He's a freshman. There's talk that he could be lured into the portal and paid a lot more money, probably by an SEC school. And so they're dealing with that. So over the next month, NC State is the better team, but they're also trying to figure out how to keep their team together to potentially play in the Gator Bowl.
To me, guys, there's really 3, and I think we're all saying the same thing. There's 3 real clear reasons why you want to face North Carolina over North Carolina State, maybe 4. But number 1, as we've talked about, if Drake May opts out of the bowl, which we're saying seems like he would, just based on what other guys do and what Drake May's draft stock is, well, you take our quarterback off Carolina team, and they look pretty darn beatable, and you get a prime chance to finish your year with a win. So that's reason number 1. Number 2, as we've discussed, you're playing North Carolina State in week 2 next season. I don't know that it helps one team more than the other to get kind of a preview. I mean, a lot of faces could change between now and next September anyway, but I don't really know that that excites you too much, facing a team in a bowl game that you're going to see in week 2. And then reason number 3, I think if you're Tennessee, you just never want that 2017 coaching search to come up ever again. But the stories are just right there for the taking. Dave Doran, the coach at North Carolina State, who's done a very nice job there the last several years, he was the last name John Curry was in pursuit of until Curry went AWOL. The administration lost sight of him, and he flew cross-country to go meet with Mike Leach, while Dave Doran's agent was texting John Curry saying, "Hey, we got a deal? What's going on here? Where'd you go? What happened?" So Dave Doran was on the hook waiting to become the next Vols coach, while Curry was on that flight that evidently had no Wi-Fi to have that clandestine meeting with Mike Leach. And of course, Curry didn't get Dave Doran or Mike Leach because Tennessee fired him. But I don't know that you really want those Dave Doran Tennessee stories to come flooding back in your bowl week. So add it all up, and the fact that North Carolina's probably a bigger brand but a weaker team. And yeah, my final verdict is very conclusive. You want to play North Carolina, not North Carolina State, if this is indeed Tennessee's path.
Well, and also if you play NC State, knowing you're going to play them in week 2 next year, if you're Josh Heupel, you absolutely can't play Nico because you got to hide him. You can't let them have any film on Nico. And so in the post game, when Josh Heupel would come out and discuss the 6-point win or 6-point loss that they had against NC State, and he's asked, how come you didn't put Nico in there at the end? And well, didn't want him to see him. You got to think of next season. So it'd be something for Josh Heupel to hang his hat on.
Yeah, maybe he just wants to make sure about that red shirt. Yeah, we believe he's got a red shirt, but we'll just make very sure, and we won't play him in the bowl game. I think that would. Of course, these teams could change dramatically from this bowl game to next season, but I don't. Adam brings it up about NC State, though. If they lose their best players on defense, this team's very beatable as well. I think so. Either way, I guess, Adam, what do you think about? Is there a chance that Joe Milton would opt out of this game?
No, I don't think so. This bowl's going to be in Florida. That's a point of pride with him of playing in Florida. And there was a little hint at the end of the post game the other night. the post game was over. We asked all our questions. They basically dismissed the players. And Jacob Warren, the tight end, who's a sixth-year tight end, said, "Hey, before we go, I just want to say a few things to the reporters in the room." And he thanked all the media that have covered him all the way back to high school in some instances. And so he gave that little speech, the little thank you. And then Joe Milton said, "Well, if you're going to say that, I guess I'll say my piece too." And Joe did the same thing, thanked all the reporters for the coverage and all that. And then he said, over these last 3 years, it's been good. And he said, but we got one more to go, meaning one more game. He didn't have any eligibility left. And so I thought that was a little bit of an indication, like, I absolutely intend to play this game.
And I think, Adam, I think he really enjoys playing as
Sure.
well. And I also think, for example, if he went up against NC State's defense and played well, that would enhance his draft status.
Yeah, I mean, you think about what's before the 6-touchdown game against a bad Vanderbilt team the other night. What was the best that you had seen Joe Milton play? Maybe not just statistically, but the best you ever saw him play. It was in the Orange Bowl last year. It's when he had a month to prepare to play in that game. Well, he'll have a month to prepare in the Gator Bowl. If anybody, in NFL circles that would be giving him advice, I think would tell him, go see if you can put another good bowl game together, with that month to prepare, and go play the Gator Bowl. His draft stock obviously has dropped during the season. He could bring it back up a little bit. And every time that he makes a quote unquote NFL throw against a Power 5 team, you get at least a couple of scouts to say, well, he didn't do it much, but he just did it there. And you remember in the Orange Bowl, there was about 3 or 4 throws. The one particular that I remember is how he split the safeties on the touchdown to Brew McCoy, crossing pattern over the middle. And you saw that and you said, that's an NFL throw. That's NFL timing. Not everybody can make that throw. He does 3 or 4 like that in the Gator Bowl. He probably moves up around, whether that's from the 6th to the 5th or the 5th to the 4th or whatever, but it would only help him to play in the Gator Bowl. I don't think he would have much to lose, because at this point, I think Joe Milton's going to throw for 200 yards and he's going to throw for 2 touchdowns and he's going to run a little bit. He's going to be fine, but on a really good day, he can help himself.
So you don't count Vanderbilt as a Power 5 conference school?
Well, they looked very similar to me the other day to they didn't look as good as Austin Peay. They did not look as good as Austin Peay. And Austin Peay is an FCS playoff team. So there's that.
Adam, you had some perspective on this season in a piece you wrote after the Vanderbilt game, sort of looking at this year with the context of what Tennessee has been and done really since the end of the Philip Fulmer era, and you take last year out of it. A year like Tennessee has had this year would have ranked as a pretty good season. Now, if we're putting this up against the Butch Jones era, Butch had 2 years where they went 8-4 in the regular season, and they won the bowl games in both of those years. In 2015 and 2016, Tennessee won bowls to get to 9-4. We've talked on this podcast throughout the season, like our different perspectives, perceptions of the season. So now as we look at it here with the benefit of the regular season's over, there's 1 game left. Bowl games don't mean as much as they used to, but how much could this perception change, if at all? Maybe the answer is not much, based on what Tennessee does in this bowl game. And I say that with, I think back to Jeremy Pruitt's second season. Tennessee played in the Gator Bowl. They rallied. They beat Indiana. They win that game to get to 8-5 versus 7-6. And the Vols were flying high. Like, that was the offseason that led to the infamous quote from Philip Fulmer, where he said, the Vols are back, and they were going to come take a bite out of everybody's ass, to quote Philip. And, well, of course, that didn't happen. Next time we saw Philip, he was sitting at a press conference, quote, retiring. But it did change the perception quite a bit, the fact that Tennessee not only went to the Gator Bowl, but beat Indiana. However, that was a different time, right? That was year 2 for Pruitt. Pruitt wasn't coming off of an 11-win season like Josh Heupel's is this year. So how much do you think it swings perception, I guess, based on what Tennessee does in this final appearance here?
Well, I'm glad you said perception, not reality, because I do think no matter what happens, we're going to overreact to the result of this bowl game, win or lose. Here's the thing: if Nico was starting and playing the majority of the game, I think there would be the chance for a real uptick in terms of the perception of the program if they went out and won, or even if he played well and they lost. The fact that Joe Milton, I think, is going to start and play most, if not all, the game, I think that sort of taps the brakes on things. Like if Joe plays great, fine. It's sort of like the Vanderbilt game the other day. He had 6 touchdowns. Some people said, hey, good for Joe. Other people were like, well, where was that all year? Well, you weren't playing Vanderbilt. That's where that was all year. But, there's not, if Joe is playing in almost all the Gator Bowl and Nico's not, you can't really say this points to anything next year. So that's where in bowls, especially in this era, I think more than past eras, you really look at the bowl game as sort of a preview of the next year. That's how we thought of the Orange Bowl this last year. The fact that I don't think Nico's going to play a lot, I think it maybe takes that off the table to some extent. But there are other elements that you could see. If it was a win, you could point to some things that would give you optimism for next year. So let's say that Cooper Mays announces between now and then that he's going to come back. You could say, okay, well, this or some other linemen. There's almost the whole offensive line could come back. Almost the whole offensive line could not come back. If you get those announcements between now and then, you could say, hey, this line's going to be back. Only Nico's going to be back there. You could have some of the young wide receivers, Nimrod and Webb, have a big game, and you would suddenly say, okay, this guy's going to start next year. He just had a breakout game. Dylan Sampson, if as long as he's still on the roster when the Gator Bowl comes around, because let's say Jalen Wright opts out, which I think he might, and go to the NFL. If Dylan Sampson is then your number one running back and he rushes for 150 yards, you say, hey, look, running back's taken care of. You got the next NFL guy. One of these young wide receivers is coming along. This offensive line's going to come back. If the defensive line, if those guys announce the COVID seniors that they're coming back, you can hang their hat on that. And suddenly you feel like you got a little bit of momentum. You're just taking out Joe Milton and you're plugging in Nico. So there's some possibilities there, but I think the big bump that you could get is probably going to be off the table, and that would be if Nico played well in the game.
It seems as though that I expect there to be so much activity in the transfer portal this December, more so than ever, that could really overshadows what happens in a bowl game. Whatever transpires where you come away, whatever impression that makes on you, when you look to the next season, if you've got added several key transfers or you've lost several guys you thought could help your team next year, that would kind of override a bowl game, whatever the result was.
Yeah, I think the calendar is important too this year. So like last year, the transfer portal was open virtually all the time. You could just, Tennessee lost 14 scholarships players to the portal last year. And some of them went in November, some went in January, and so on and so forth. This year, you have a 30-day window, December 4th to January 2nd. So there's going to be 3 or 4 days left of the portal being open after Tennessee's bowl. You wouldn't think anybody would jump in the portal, that late. And then you have another 15-day window in April after spring practice. So let's just focus on that first one. By the time Tennessee gets to the bowl, you're going to know who's leaving, who went in the portal, and who's not. You may know who's coming back of the COVID seniors by then. I think they'll tell Josh Heupel privately, and publicly they may announce that too. By the time we get to the bowl, we'll probably have a general idea of who's coming back, and that's important either way. I was counting through the starting 22 for Tennessee this year to see how many were coming back. You've got guys that are done with their eligibility, the seniors that are like Joe Milton and Jacob Warren, they're completely done. We know they're not coming back. You've got NFL guys Tyler Barron, Jalen Wright that could come back, but they probably won't. You've got COVID seniors, and that's a ton of guys that could come back or they may leave. You've got maybe some guys that'll be in the portal. I counted those up. Of the 22 starters, Tennessee could return 4 of the 22 starters, or they could return 14 of the 22 starters, or more likely somewhere in between the two. Now, imagine if you're talking about 4 starters coming back of 22. That's an absolutely complete rebuild. If you've got 14 starters coming back, and Nico's not even one of them, you're plugging in Nico with 14 returning starters, that's a team that can go out and win 9 games. And so there's a big chasm between those two numbers, but I think we'll probably know closer to what that number is going to be by the time they get to the bowl game, because the portal is going to be almost closed. We're probably going to get a lot of news on the COVID seniors, their decisions, and by then, either opt-outs or otherwise, we're going to know which guys for sure are going to the NFL.
Well, I just think it's really interesting, and it gets back to, with the transfer portal, you play offense and defense. You're trying to keep your guys here, and then you're trying to bring in other guys. And there could be such a shift. I mean, and I think on the player side of this, players use this as leverage. I mean, they go to coach and say, "Hey, I'm going in the transfer portal. I'd like to come back, but I need to know, what can you do for me?" It's not as though you've got an unlimited supply of NIL money. You've got to see it really reflects what a pro-like game this has become. When you're sitting there, not as a coach, but as a general manager, and you're saying, "Do I want to pay this guy this much money?"
It's absolute roster management. You've essentially have a salary cap, and not different teams have different salary caps in their NIL collective. But Dylan Sampson is worth a lot of NIL money, because Jalen Wright, if he does leave, Dylan Sampson can take up the bulk of what Jalen Wright's money was. And a year ago, Jalen Wright, we thought he would maybe go into the portal. He didn't. He got a bigger payday. Dylan Sampson can go get that payday now, or at least a portion of it. Cooper Mays has a lot of leverage. If Cooper Mays returns, then he makes that offense so much better. If he doesn't, you don't even know who the starting center is going to be. Right now, the starting center next year, if Cooper Mays didn't come back, would be Vyson Lang. And who? I don't know exactly. I don't know how many people listening know who Vyson Lang is. He's the freshman this year. He played like 14 snaps, and so that's the difference that you have. And I'm sure Cooper Mays knows he has that leverage. Some of these defensive linemen, they were really good on the defensive line this year. There's a lot of COVID seniors up there that would maybe want a 10% bump in their NIL to come back, but you have to weigh all that against what you need to set aside to go in the portal to make your team better. So you're retaining, you're also trying to go get guys. I'm sure there's going to be some guys that go into Josh Heupel's office, and at least indirectly ask for a raise, and they're told you're fired. That's the analogy I would use, because there's some guys that have been around for a while and have started some games and played a lot, and their replacement, either a freshman on the team now or somebody that get in the portal, may be better, and it's probably cheaper.
I hope it goes better for them when they ask for a raise than it does when I do. But I've never been fired. But
what
a sad conversation.
Who has more leverage than Nico?
Well, I mean, Nico's already signed, so I mean, he's already got that 7-figure NIL deal. So here's a good question, John, to follow that one up. How much leverage or how much say does Nico have in where the NIL money goes? Now, he seems like a pretty mild-mannered, humble guy who's just learning the ropes of college football. But we think of all these things are similar to the NFL, right? Like, NIL renegotiations or contract renegotiations. Recruiting is now the draft. The transfer portal is free agency. Well, in the NFL, quarterbacks tend to go to their GMs and say, "I want this I want a wide receiver. I want a left tackle. Don't spend money on defense. Spend money on offense." And I don't think Nico's going to do that. I don't think he even knows he would have that leverage, even if he did. But he could certainly do that. Don't go get a corner or a pass rusher. Go get this wide out in the transfer portal. Get me a left tackle. He's got his NIL money, but if he wanted to have some influence, he certainly could. And I think Josh Heupel's ear would be itching on that, because Josh Heupel wants to go get offense and he wants to score. I know he says he wants defense too, and they were competitive defensively this year, but statistically they were better defensively this year than last year. Last year they went 11-2. Right now they're 8-4. The way that they're going to get into the playoff in the future is by scoring a lot of points, and Josh Heupel knows that.
When it comes to Nico, guys, I mean, that's who fans want to see. We know this at this point, right? That's who they want to see in the bowl game. So the question is not what the fans want. The question is not what Joe Milton wants. Adam has told us he thinks Milton's going to play in the bowl game, or even what Josh Heupel wants. My question is, how much should Nico play in the bowl in your mind? Because I would probably make the argument that what does the bowl game really matter? I mean, it's kind of like we were talking about shaping perception of the season. It does shape perception, but how much does it really matter? Not really a ton. And so if you're playing for next year, you shake Joe Milton's hand and said, "Been a hell of a run, buddy. Thanks for all you did. We want you to go prepare for the draft and spend these next several weeks doing all you can, impressing NFL personnel as you do some workouts or something. But it's Nico time."
I want to hear what John has to say.
So,
John,
what do you guys think?
John, I want to hear what you have to say first on this one.
Well, see,
your team Nico, right?
Yeah, I would look at it as you're trying to attract transfers. You want to attract an offensive tackle. You want to attract a big play wide receiver. We'll show them what you've got at quarterback. This is a showcase game. This is a game for next season. Go back to last season and how well Joe Milton played against Clemson. Because of how well he played, I think is why Tennessee was ranked as high in preseason. I think it was 11th, 12th, something like that, even though it was losing some really big-time players. I think the effect of Nico playing could be prominent next year. And I'm speaking hypothetically because I'm sure Josh Heupel will probably play Joe Milton every down of the bowl game.
Yeah, I mean, the Vandy game the other day, Joe Milton, I thought would play the first half. If there was a big lead, Nico would come out and play all the third quarter, maybe part of the fourth. We get our biggest dose of Nico that we've gotten so far in his freshman year. Instead, Joe Milton came out, I think scored a touchdown, and then he came back out again. And I think it was 38-10 late in the third quarter. And so you thought, well, he's going out there again? Okay, so what this is going to be is Joe Milton's going to hand the ball off one time, and then he's going to get the curtain call, and he's going to get an ovation. They're going to have him jog off the field and wave to the fans. And then I think the next play they threw a deep ball. And then you thought, oh, they're trying to get him 6 touchdowns. They're trying to get him 400 yards. I don't know why. I mean, but I mean, it was good for Joe, I guess. He did get his Hendon Hooker was at the game, and Joe can say, "Hey, I don't remember you scoring 6 touchdowns, but I just did." I don't think Hendon ever had 6 in a game. So maybe it was that. Maybe there was some ego with Josh Heupel or the staff saying, "Hey, look, we can still do this when we want to against bad teams." I don't know, because that whole setup was, I mean, it was 38-10, and then Joe Milton scores a 6 touchdown, and now it's 45-10, and they go into the fourth quarter, and then they say, okay, 45-10, that's enough. This lead is protected. and that was Joe Milton's last home game. There was no reason to do it. So I say all that to say this. Josh Heupel is going to stick with Joe Milton. He just is. I don't know if he's aware of how much that frustrates fans. Then if Josh Heupel is aware of that, then he's being stubborn, because other coaches would have played Nico in the whole second half with that score. And so if he understands that frustration, then I think he's being stubborn, and he just wants to say, I'm the coach and I want to go with Joe Milton, and that's what it is. And that's fine. If he's not fully aware of that, and I think this actually may be the more probable scenario, that he's not fully aware of that, and he's just resolved to stick with his 6-year senior that stuck with him, that was loyal. And Josh Heupel loves points, and I think he was going to keep him in there to see if they could get to 50. And they got to 45, and then he said, hey, I can bring Nico in, score another, and we get to 50. And, I saw a stat on the ESPN ticker after that game the other night that by scoring 45 points, Tennessee has scored 45 or more the most times of any FBS team in the country over the last 3 years. So since Josh Heupel got there, they have the most 45-point games of any team. And do we think Josh Heupel knew that stat before then? I tend to think, as much as he likes numbers, he probably did, because he pulled Joe Milton out when they got to 45. And that's just the coach he is, for whatever reason. He loves points, and he loves yards, and he loves deep balls, and he loves all that stuff. And I think there's also some ego, and I mean this somewhat as a compliment. I think there's enough ego with Josh Heupel that he believes, if you give me a full off season in practice and scrimmages and spring practice and simulated 7-on-7s and all this that I have with Nico, it's just as good as game reps, because I've developed a lot of great quarterbacks, and I can do it with this guy too. And giving Nico 40 snaps as opposed to 20 snaps against Vanderbilt doesn't make any bit of difference. And instead, I would like Joe Milton to get 6 touchdowns and high five Joe Milton coming off the field. And I think that's probably more of what happened.
Well, for somebody that likes points and yards as much as Josh Heupel does, he lost some fans in that game because of a lack of points, because the betting line there at the end, Tennessee didn't cover in that game, and it looked like surely Tennessee will cover. And so I heard from a few fans who were not happy about it when he put Gavin Moore in the game at quarterbacks.
They won by 24. What was the line? 27? Is that right?
27 and a half, I think. But yeah,
okay,
but they were comfortably ahead at one point. They had the line covered. And maybe if Nico would have stayed in the game. And I tell you what, as much as fans complain about Joe Milton playing all the time and not getting a look at Nico, the fans betting on that game would probably say, yeah, just keep Milton in, let him finish this thing off.
But it was funny, though, to see, all three of us have covered those Tennessee Vanderbilt games that are over by the end of the first quarter. And now you're just like, John, like you're saying, are they going to cover or not? In the fourth quarter, that place was still 80% full. And there's only one reason why it was. It wasn't to see if they were going to get to 45 or 50 or whatever. They wanted to see Nico. And as soon as Nico put his helmet on, that place cheered. And as soon as Nico jogged off, both to attempt a field goal and another time when Gaston Moore went in, the fans howled, because they were there to see Nico, and they'll want to see him in the bowl game. And maybe something changes between now and then. I think if that game is close and it's a competitive game, and North Carolina and NC State, I think, are comparable teams to Tennessee this year. I think if the game's close, it'll be Joe Milton as long as needed.
Yeah, I agree. And we're not there yet. Of course, Adam mentioned maybe some things change. We'll find out Tennessee's bowl assignment and opponent on Sunday. Adam will have the coverage at KnoxNews.com. Of course, you can also find John's commentary, and we will be back with you next week. Thanks for listening to the Volunteer State.